Welcome back to WordReference. So we're going to learn a little bit more about how WordReference works and most importantly, how to make sure that you're coming up with the word or phrase that you actually want to say. So this is part 2 of how to use WordReference. So a quick recap of what we talked about last time. We said that WordReference is awesome, but you have to know how to use it. It does not work like a translator. So with a couple quick tips, you'll be using it like a pro. So we don't type in complete sentences. We don't just go for the first word it gives us. So the first thing we said is that you're going to look up one word at a time. You're not going to add in any of those extra little bitty words because those are things that you know how to put in. We said that you need to spell it correctly because if not, you're not going to get the right word. We said that you need to understand how the word is being used in terms of what part of speech it is. So think about what function that word has in the sentence, and then you need to reference the appropriate abbreviation that WordReference is going to use to refer to that. After that, you need to consider the context. So the context is where WordReference will give you these explanations in parentheses of how that term is used. So you have that in addition to the part of speech. And remember, WordReference also will tell you whether a word is masculine or feminine, which is something else that's really important that we need to know. So we went through those last time, but we're not quite done. There's a little bit more. So step 5 of WordReference is that we need to conjugate and we need to agree. So what that means is that a dictionary, which is really what WordReference is, it's just online rather than paper. A dictionary tends to give you usually just the most basic form of the word, meaning that you need to do the work of putting it in the sentence correctly. For verbs, that means that WordReference will give you the verb in the infinitive form, the most basic. You still have to conjugate it, probably, to put it in your sentence. Now, if you look up a verb and it doesn't look like it's a nice normal ER verb or some other verb that you already know how to conjugate, if it looks like it might be something weird, then WordReference has this really cool little tool where it will actually give you all of the conjugations. So here I looked up the verb drive, and I know I'm getting a verb because it has the V. I'm looking in the parentheses, operate a vehicle. Yep, that's what I want to say. And it gives me the French verb conduire. And I look at that and I go, that looks a little strange. I'm not sure if I actually know how to say I drive or we drive. So there's this little double arrow that you have right next to the verb. I'm going to show you what that does. So here's drive as I looked it up in WordReference. So I looked up drive. I've got my dictionary English to French. And this is the one that I want to use because operate a vehicle, it's the most basic one. Now here's my conduire, and the V tells me that it's a verb, but this little arrow right next to it, if I just hover over it, it says conjugate conduire. So I click on that, and then it has this crazy chart of all of these different forms of conduire, which I realize looked really overwhelming. The good news for you is that you do not need to understand any of this because all you have to do is go to the top left group right there. Présent, this is present tense. So this is how you say I drive, you drive, he, she, one drives, we drive, y'all drive, they drive. So all of this other stuff that you have no idea what it is, just ignore it. You don't need it. Passé composé, we're going to be learning this year, so this will be helpful to you. But really for right now, you're just going to be looking where it says présent. Nice and basic, it'll show you exactly what you need. So there is a conjugation tool in WordReference if you come across a verb that you're not sure what you need to do with. So that's conjugate. Now my note here says that you also have to agree. So that refers to adjectives, because adjectives, like we've been working with a lot already, are usually given just in the basic masculine singular form. If it has irregular forms, those might be provided for you. Otherwise, assume that it follows regular rules. So our regular rules are that we add an E to make it feminine, we add an S to make it plural. When you look up an adjective, you're going to see the ADJ to tell you that it's an adjective. You're going to read the information in parentheses. So person who's insane, yep, that's what I want to say. Now over here, it gives me fou and folle. What this tells me is that this is the masculine form and this is the feminine form. It's probably not going to give me the plural versions of those unless the plurals are really weird, but it's at least going to give me the masculine and the feminine. And so I have those two and I can figure out what to do with it after that. So if it only gave me one word there, then I would assume that I follow the normal rules for adjective agreement. So when you're looking up something, you still have to do a little bit of work in terms of putting it in the sentence correctly for how you're going to use it. Now, rule number 6 is actually kind of a when not to rely on word reference or when not to use word reference one word at a time. Idiomatic expressions are phrases that don't mean exactly what their individual words represent. And those don't work well in word reference. So let me show you why. In English, we have the phrase, it's raining cats and dogs. So if you translated that word for word into French, you would say, il pleut des chats et des chiens. But that doesn't actually mean anything to a French person because a French person says, il pleut des cordes. It is raining cords. So if you try to go to word reference and look this up one word at a time, like you're supposed to do with everything else, you're not really going to get the right phrase. A couple of other examples of idiomatic expressions. I have a frog in my throat is what we say if we have kind of a sore throat and a weird voice. But in French, they say, j'ai un chat dans la gorge. I have a cat in the throat. So same idea, different animal. But if you translate that word for word into French, a French person would be very confused and they would think that you have an actual amphibian lodged in your trachea. One more example. We use the expression, that's the last straw. Like we're not going to tolerate it anymore. Now, in French, they have a completely different expression for that. C'est la goutte d'eau qui fait déborder le vase, which means that is the drop of water that overflows the vase. That is certainly not at all a word-for-word translation of that's the last straw. So word reference doesn't work in the same way if you have an idiomatic expression. Now, what you can do is if you're trying to translate a phrase that you think is kind of more of an expression, if it means something a little bit different than what the individual words suggest, you can try looking it up as a phrase because it's raining cats and dogs is a phrase in word reference. I have a frog in my throat would be a phrase in word reference. That's the last straw is a phrase in word reference. So normally we're looking up just one word at a time, but if it's something where the phrase is a little different from the words, try looking it up as a phrase. If you can't find it there in word reference, then just ask me for help. Madame, how do we express this idea in French? Now, the last one is kind of my miscellaneous category, other advice from Madame. So, number 1, and I cannot emphasize this enough, there is no get in French. And we use the word get all the time. So, if you're in a situation where you would want to say get, my best advice for you is come up with a different word in English that you could use in place of it and look that up. And let me show you why you want to do that. So this is what it looks like when I look up get in English to French. So, looks like everything else we've seen. Here's get, as in get something. It shows us that it's a verb. And the meaning that it gives for us is obtain. And so the first translation that we're given is obtenir, also avoir, to have. And then it goes into a few more specifics. Now, if you think about how you use the word get, I'm guessing that most of the time you probably don't want obtenir because obtain isn't really what you want to say there. Here's the real problem with looking up the word get. This is what we see when we first open up the screen. However, if I keep scrolling, and I keep scrolling, and I keep scrolling, we're going to see that get is used in a million different ways. And there are all of these different phrases that use get. So get across, get ahead, get along, get around, to get away with, get back. You see how long this list is going on? Get a grip, get a hold of, get a life, get a loan, get a response. You would have to page through all of this to find the phrase that you actually want. And I'm thinking that that's probably not something you want to spend your time on. So the best option is think about a different word that you could use instead of get and look that up. So would it be receive, for example? There are lots of different ways we use it. So think about what's a different way you could word it in English if you weren't allowed to say get, and then look up that word. That's going to be your best bet. So back to our other advice. We're going to stay away from the word get. The other thing that I want you to stay away from is anything that ends with ing. We use that ing ending all the time in English, and the problem is that sometimes when we use ing, it's on a noun. Sometimes it's on a present tense verb. Sometimes it's on a past tense verb. We use it in all different ways, and you're not at the point yet where you can distinguish how it's being used, and more importantly, how the French would put that together. Because in most cases where we would use an ing verb, the French simply use the infinitive of that verb. So stay away from ing because you're probably not going to come up with the right thing. So if you wanted to say, I like baking, rather than looking up the word for baking, look up bake as in a verb and put together the sentence, I like to bake, because that's really the idea that you want to express. So don't ever look up anything that ends with ing because you're probably not going to get what you need for how you're putting it together. Next piece, if you're not sure if you found the correct translation, what you can always do is look it up in reverse, so French to English, and see if it returns the idea you want. You can generally do this by actually just clicking on the word that you think is the word you want to use, and it will flip the dictionary around, and you can check and see, okay, is the English word that they're giving me as the meaning for this, does that actually make sense for what I want to say? So there is a way that you can kind of double check your translations here. When in doubt, attempt a translation and then check it with Madame. So look up something in WordReference, test it out, try it in your sentence. And if you're really not sure if it's the right word or if you're stuck between 2 or 3 options, bring it to me and check with me. Hey, Madame, is this right? And then my last piece for you, do not ever resort to using an online translator. It is essentially plagiarism because you're having something else do your work for you, and you're not actually using language, you're not actually learning language. And that is the whole point that we are in French class. So that's my other advice for you in terms of using WordReference. You'll have lots of opportunities to use it the rest of the year and get a lot better at making sure that you're finding exactly what you want to say.